Mohsen, are you ready to start?
Always ready.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hana El Sadat. I'm the founder of NEA. It's a platform that aims to empower and serve nonprofit organizations across Egypt by linking them to civil society. I also have the honor and privilege to be a part of the board of the Egyptian Food Bank. With me today is none other than Mohsen Sarhan. Mohsen is currently the director of the Egyptian Food Bank. He is the brains, the power, and he has so much to offer within this field. I'm going to leave the floor for Mohsen to introduce himself before I jump in and take the stage from him. Mohsen?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Hannah. Humbled by the introduction. It's great to be talking to you today, and it's great to be talking to everyone joining us today. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Mohsen Sarhan. I've been working in the Egyptian Food Bank for the past 3 years, give or take. In total, I've been working in development, I think, for the past 12 years, and before that, maybe 8 or 9 years in the private sector. It's a bit of a long story, the transition. Maybe we can leave it for another webinar, but I'm one of the lucky few whose hearts aligned perfectly with the work in the development world. So I don't think I'm fit for work in the private sector anymore. My education is focused primarily on public administration and specifically on nonprofit governance and nonprofit strategy. My intention today is to make this a very frank and open discussion. So Hannah, please ask whatever comes in your mind. I'm hoping that our journey in the food bank for the past 3 years and our transition from a purely output-based charity to what now is a very strong foundation for a purely impact-based development institution might give everyone listening to us today a few tips or a few paths to consider. So ask whatever comes on your minds, and I'm ready.
Before we get started, please, if anyone has any questions, please shoot them in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to oblige. So Mohsen, I just want to take a step back. Today we're talking about charity, from charity to food security. So first I want to focus on charity. You're someone who's worked in this field for many, many years. You have been part of other nonprofit organizations. What is charity in Egypt? What does it mean to do charity, and how have nonprofits gone about this concept with their work, with their programs, and what do they consider a success?
It's a beautiful question. Beautiful question, Hannah. Thank you very much. Okay, so my main, I'll be a little bit personal in this talk. So whatever I say does not represent the Egyptian Food Bank. It represents me. I want you to
get as personal as possible.
So I'll be a little bit personal in my views. So to me, charity is not a bad thing. As much as many colleagues in the development world here in Egypt, and even regionally and internationally, love to label charity and development as opposite sides of being good coin. But to me, very simply, development is the overarching umbrella. So development, if we reduce it to its most basic definition, it's moving people. So I'm talking about human development here, of course. It's moving people from point A, which is measured in a technical term. We have a baseline for it, to a point B, which is planned, and I have a way to measure it in the most efficient and shortest way possible, because anything other than that would be leakage and would be depriving other people from having that service. Sometimes, actually, at many times, what we label as charity is the most efficient and the shortest path to move people from point A to point B. And we have for that many examples of evidence-based programs that has groundbreaking success in tens of countries and over, I would say, tens of millions of people. And one of the basic examples that is being applied here in Egypt is the CCT and UCCT programs. So we have the Takaful and Karama program running here through the Ministry of Social Solidarity, and it's being applied on over 5 million families in Egypt. So Takaful part is a conditional cash transfer program, and Karama part is an unconditional cash transfer program. And if we reduce these programs to their basic service delivery mode, you'll say they are pure charitable programs. You're just giving away cash. Sometimes you're tying it to certain conditions, and sometimes you're just giving away cash. But in essence, these programs are evidence-based, and they have caused tremendous success worldwide in graduating people out of poverty. My main problem is when nonprofits focus on output alone. So since the late 60s, when the USAID came with the logical framework, and then in the 90s, the United Nations started applying the RBM matrices, and then the EU followed, and the rest of the development institutions and the donor agencies worldwide started developing their logical models in planning and evaluating development. Since then, the starting point has to be impact. And then when we know the impact we want to reach, we draw a chain that links that impact to everything that we do in the nonprofits. Unfortunately, many, and I'm coming home to your point of measuring success here. Unfortunately, to many development institutions all around the world, they design for output and then they celebrate output also. And that causes tremendous problems. It causes problems in governance. So the metrics of success now vary a lot between the board members and the executive team, and between the board members and the community, and even among members of the board themselves and among members of the executive team themselves. So there isn't a universal, I wouldn't say a social contract, but there isn't a universal work conduct that says this is what we do and this is how we evaluate our success and this is how to communicate to the public that we have fundraised from, that we made it. To give an example for that, I will take the Egyptian Food Bank itself. So when we started the Egyptian Food Bank, we started back in 2005. It was a little bit informal, and we got institutionalized in 2006. And we just, like any traditional food bank all around the world, we just took in-kind donations from supermarkets, from households that were beyond their need, and then we repacked it and gave it away to people who need it. And then we, as the years went by, we still had the same development philosophy at core, is getting food from somewhere and giving away. But then we got really big. And then we started fundraising cash also. And then we started fundraising hundreds of millions of cash. And then we started putting targets to ourselves that we need to cover as much people who need food as possible with food boxes.
So Mohsen, sorry, just to jump in here.
Sure.
Is it not safe to say that if you fed someone already, then you met that target? Was it not hunger the initial target? So by feeding a person in need, you were successful at the time, correct?
Because that was the design, so it's absolutely correct. But the problem is, so this will bring me back to a very foundational aspect of how nonprofits should think and should operate. So I always say that nonprofits are, they are as the eyes of the beholder sees them. So nonprofits are incepted and they operate according to what the founders see as a vision. So if the founders see that their ultimate metric of success is just feeding someone now, so feeding someone now is the end goal, and it is success to them and to the people who they fundraise from. But if we talk about an institution of that scale, so an institution of that scale has much more to offer. And I always also say that now we have, I don't know, since the 40s, since the end of World War II, and when development studies started branching out of pure economics literature, we have over 50 years of accumulated evidence and experience on how to sustainably fight hunger as a cause area. And the framework is set. And that's why when we put our strategic plan for the Egyptian Food Bank, we chose to align ourselves perfectly with SDG 2, because it's pretty logical and it lays an evidence-based foundation on how we can fight hunger beyond just celebrating that someone was hungry today and then I solved their problem, but the effectiveness of my intervention and the sustainability of that intervention, and whether that box that I'm giving it to a beneficiary today is the best intervention in that area.
I think, Mohsen, that's fair enough. But would you not say that initially the way that nonprofit organizations were initially established in Egypt, that culture around why they were made and their missions at the time is what sort of, I want to say, set the tone to how nonprofits went about viewing success?
Okay. It's an interesting question. And that's the normal evolution of nonprofits, even in the literature worldwide, since the concept even started. It started with charitable activities and responding to immediate needs and responding to crises. And then, again, worldwide, with the establishment of professional agencies like the United Nations and the USAID and the European Union, and the Danish cooperation and various development institutions all around the world. Now there is a mediator, a professional mediator that most of the time works with taxpayers' money. And when someone works with taxpayers' money and trying to do development, they have to get back to the taxpayers and tell them that we have solve the problem in the most efficient way possible. As nonprofits now in Egypt, with the accumulated knowledge we have in that field, we are faced with the same situation. We mobilize funds from the public, and we tell the public, I'll again come back to the Egyptian Food Bank, and we tell the public that we're taking that money to fight hunger. Then we have to prove back with what we know that we are fighting hunger in the most efficient and academic grounded way possible.
Mohsen, before we get more into the food bank, I want to talk about, just to give a bit of background to our audience today, what is changing within the nonprofit ecosystem today? There's a lot of changes, there's a lot of digitization. What was the nonprofit ecosystem before, and what are the changes that are ongoing right now, and how are they supporting the future of this industry?
Okay, interesting question. So I would always say that the future of any industry is primarily determined by its leadership, because it's all about the people. So you get someone on the helm of an organization, they will be able to attract similar-minded people, and then the organization will move with the collected wisdom of that group. I would say in Egypt, we have a problem that is slowly being solved, that we do not have professional schools that brings out development people. So we have professional schools in economics, we have professional schools in business, but we do not have yet professional schools in development studies. The American University has some interesting tracks. The Faculty of Economics in Cairo University has some interesting tracks, but we do not have yet dedicated schools for development like it's now ubiquitous in the West. Now, I would think the past 5 to 7 years, there has been a dramatic shift in nonprofit leadership in Egypt here, mainly from Western educated youth who studied abroad and came back here and decided to give back to their community through working in nonprofits. I would say if the ratio of people who are professionally educated in development was 10 years ago 5%, I would say now it's 35% of the leadership in the nonprofit world are professionally educated in the nonprofit world. Because you see, Hannah, it's very different from managing a private sector organization. It is more like managing a government institution, but there are also stark differences. But it's very different from managing a private sector organization. Even the tools that we use in strategic planning for a profit-making entity are very different from the tools we use in planning the strategy for a nonprofit. And the lack of leadership who are professionally educated in the nonprofit world has also caused a lack of strategic planning consultants who are usually called on board by the boards of nonprofit foundations to aid them in strategic planning. And they use private sector tools unchallenged by the leaders of the nonprofit world because they don't know any other tools than the tools used in the private sector. And you end up with an entity that is structured exactly the same way as the private sector, while there's a fundamental difference that in the private sector, profit is the end game. So wherever you find any private sector institution anywhere on the face of this world, the end game will be maximizing profit for the shareholders. That's it, nothing else. Even when the private sector engages in activities in the development domain, I would say, like corporate social responsibility activities, it has to translate into something positive on the bottom line of the company. Other than that, otherwise, the CEO will find it a bit tricky to explain the company's charitable activities to sometimes millions of shareholders worldwide. The nonprofit world, our end game is mission fulfillment. And this is not philosophical, this is very practical. So a nonprofit only exists to fulfill its mission and to fulfill the quantification of its mission into a strategic plan and objectives. And that brings me to the point I mentioned a while ago, that whatever the founders set as the mission, this becomes the ultimate objective of a nonprofit. It doesn't have to be something good. So nonprofits all around the world are established sometimes for very, very bad and very evil reasons. But again, it's a nonprofit and the founders want that.
So Mohsen, I just have to say, when I was approached about doing this webinar, I was very excited because for me, one of the issues that I find within the nonprofit ecosystem is transparency. People want to know what is the food bank. People want to know what is your journey. How have you evolved? What is it that actually the food bank does? As someone close to the food bank, I have a better idea of the structure and of the different utilization and integration of the ecosystem and the value chain of the food bank. And I think this is something that's very important to people on the outside to know more about. So I want you to touch on the journey from when you first joined the food bank. Where was the food bank at the time? And how have you evolved today, not only to better sustain the food bank, to make it more efficient, but how have you evolved it to be able to sustain the different crises that we have been going through around the world?
Okay. I think I sometimes, when I think I brought Corona to Egypt because it was on the same month that I joined the food bank. But thank you, of course, for your question. So first, if we talk about transparency before touching on my journey with the food bank, so transparency is very fundamental to the work of nonprofits, especially publicly funded ones. So if it is a private foundation that the money purely and solely comes from the founders, then maybe transparency can take a backseat a little bit. But any publicly funded organization, such as the food bank, we have to be, and I always use that term with my colleagues at the food bank, we have to be exactly like a crystal ball. So anyone looking from the outside has to understand exactly what we do, because we are funded from the public. So in other terms, legally, we are a public fund, just like the money of the government. So we have to open ourselves up entirely. And the other thing is that we use this money to intervene in people's lives. So we have to be very accountable and very responsible for everything that we do. And we have, I think, moved, I would say, satisfactory, not very satisfactory to me. We still have a very long way to go. Because transparency requires complete digitizing of all operations, especially in the world we're living in today, to be able to open ourselves in real time to the society. But we have moved very good steps in that direction. Our last step was launching the Right to Know portal, which is efd.eg/RTK, where we try to give a snapshot of everything that we do, not still in real time, but it's updated weekly. So anyone can log on and know what we do and where we do it. Okay, moving to the question. So I joined the food bank, I think it was February 2020, and then less than a month later, Corona hit. I'm trying to just, find out the main milestones, and then you can
take a minute. We're all ears.
Yeah, we can ask me or anything you want to give more details. So Corona hit, I think it was less than 20 days. I was the second CEO after the inaugural founding CEO, Dr. Moaz. And Dr. Moaz has recruited virtually everyone. And he was the first and only CEO before me, and he recruited everyone. Our headcount was, I think, around 350 employees. So he was a very, very, in other words, I had very, very big shoes to fill. I had very big shoes to fill because he has been running the organization for more than 15 years. And I'm, the young guy that's coming now, and at that point I was younger than all the management team. It was a bit of a challenging situation. But I always say that, within a crisis, you always find something bright inside. The cliche is you always find an opportunity in crisis. But I think that the crisis that hit the entire world in Corona, it has caused absolute and tremendous tragedies to me personally, to the Egyptian Food Bank team, and to the entire population of the world. But it has accelerated our bond together as a team, because at that time everyone was just stay at home, and we had to stay at the office in order to help other people stay at home. So at that time we launched an initiative called the temporary workers, or the what they call them, the people that live on daily wages. They are our responsibility.
Labor workers.
Yes. And because you had a situation at that time when COVID hit, that you had, for example, a lady selling sandwiches outside the school. So the school closed and the lady lost her job at the same time, at the same day. And you had the Uber drivers, and you had the taxi drivers, and you had the construction workers, and you had, the informal labor population in Egypt, or the intermittent labor, it exceeds at least 5 million families. So we had these people cut off from their primary source of income all of a sudden and abrupt. And this segment of the population, they don't have any disposable income to save. So they're just living, not, I wouldn't say paycheck to paycheck, they're living payday to payday. So it was a disaster for this segment of the population. So we put on ourselves a target at that time to deliver more than 1.5 million food boxes in less than 60 days. And that mission has created a bond between us as a team at the Egyptian Food Bank, which is unbreakable until today. Because I had no choice than to trust the people completely that I'm working with, even though I didn't know them and I haven't tested them. I don't know their capabilities. I didn't know anything. And also at that time, they didn't trust me. They didn't know what my vision is. If my vision is, something fictitious and I'm just selling words and nothing will come out of it. And at that time, through that journey, I think it was maybe 3 continuous months that I don't think any of us slept more than 2 or 3 hours every day for that time. I think we were at least 70 to 80 people stationed 24/7 at the food bank premises. And most of the teams that were, had children or had health conditions, they were at home, but again, they were working 24/7. And we were able to deliver our promise. And the stress test that the organization was exposed to at that time has showed me personally that even though these people I do not know, but this organization is very resilient, and its potential is even much more than I imagined. Which, of course, after the COVID, it has prompted me to push it even more, and still it delivers till today. And it made people trust me a little bit more, because at that time, the year before it, in the same period, 60 days, we were able to ship out 400,000 food boxes in the same time, but the year after, during COVID, we shipped 1.5 million. So it was more than 3 times what we did last year with the same headcount and with very turbulent conditions. So each time someone from the factory colleagues got COVID, I had to let out the entire team, stay at home, and then I had to recruit temp workers, like 150 temp workers the next day, and then one of them gets corona, so I let them all stay at home, and then I had another 150. So it was a bit of a roller coaster operation. And then at some point, the Ministry of Health came to us because there were multiple cases of COVID, and they wanted to shut us down for a couple of days, and then we shifted our production lines to an alternate location. So yeah, it was fun. It was so much fun.
It was a really hard time.
Yeah, it was hard times, but again, it was a mission that united us. So even though I was coming from a very different background, so most of my colleagues at the food bank, they joined the food bank right out of college or right out of high school. So it was their only work experience. It's the only place they saw, and they were completely attached and in love with the food bank. So their initial reaction to a second youngish CEO coming at that time, and the transition was a bit abrupt. Their first reaction was, "Oh, he's going to, wipe out everything that we did before and start from scratch, and he's going to fire us all." And rumors started to circulate, and get an entirely new team. But
I mean, I'm sure that happens with any management, but from what I've been hearing, Mohsen, you've been shaking things up in the food bank. There's a lot of changes going on. There's a lot of, I guess, integration of different partnerships. There's also a rumor of a growth lab going on in the food bank. So I want to know what is going on now. What is this new innovation this new change within the food bank that you've been pushing for?
Okay, so to illustrate this, what's happening now, I'll have to start immediately after COVID relaxed a little bit and people started getting out of homes and going normally to workplaces. So we started at that point, I think it was 8 months after I joined the food bank, we started the formal strategic planning process at the food bank that is based entirely on creating public values. It isn't based on balanced scorecards. It isn't based on anything that aims at generating profit. It's based purely on public value creation. And I was fortunate enough to be a student of public value creation. And I would like to thank publicly Professor Mark Moore. I don't know if he's hearing us today, but I make it a point to every now and then thank him of Harvard Kennedy School for schooling me in that method. And the food bank, I think we formally ratified from the board our strategic plan. I think a year and a half ago, it was February 2021. And the strategic plan is structured as follows. So we have three main pillars of intervention, or in other words, the food bank is based on three main foundations. One of them is creating public value. The second one is ensuring support and acceptance from the communities we work in. And the third one is ensuring operational excellence. Ensuring operational excellence, it's a little bit boring. So it's about having all the SOPs and the internal audit mechanisms in place, and having checks and balances, and having risk management systems, and achieving agility and speed in our operations. It's pretty much boring private sector stuff. Ensuring community acceptance and mobilization, again, it's pretty boring private sector stuff, and it's mainly concerned with mobilizing funds and ensuring that our brand image stays positive. We measure something called the Net Promoter Score, and general brand awareness and cause preference and things like that. The creating public value pillar is where all the work is happening. So creating public value, the first segment of the creating public value pillar is about mission fulfillment. So one of the first things that were very integral to what we do today is that we changed our mission statement in the last strategic planning exercise. So our mission statement before, and the very big flag that we used to raise, was that together to end poverty. And as mobilizing and as inspiring to hear that and to carry that flag, but it's unrealistic because it will never end. And I would love to talk more about this, but I'll absorb the entire session on why academically you cannot entirely wipe out poverty, especially now at that time when the Secretary General of the United Nations, each and every conference he attends that's related to food systems or is related to food security, says that this is one of the targets that will be impossible to achieve. It's very hard. It's very hard, especially after COVID. So we changed our mission statement to alleviating the suffering of people affected by hunger. And from that mission statement, we drew a framework that intervenes on 4 of the 5 indicators of SDG 2. The first one is ensuring that families that are incapable of working, or segments of the population that are incapable of working have, namely female-headed households, people with mental or physical disabilities that prevents them from working, and elderly population that are unable to work. So we ensure that these segments of the population get the safe, adequate, and nutritious calories and constitution of calories required for them to lead a healthy life. And we set a bar that achieves a healthy life, not a subsistence life, a healthy life for that segment. The second program area we work in ensuring that women from pregnancy and their children up to 12 years old get adequate nutrition to prevent prevalence of diseases like, namely, stunting and wasting. And then the third pillar is, we call it empowerment, but the technical term is value chain integration. It's a purely private sector inspired inclusive business model where we integrate needy segments of the population that can work within our value chain and within our supply chain, either as producers or as labor within our operation or as distributors. Where the growth lab that you kindly mentioned fits, so we established a year ago the EFB Growth Lab. The EFB Growth Lab is basically the brains and the ultimate accountability vehicle for what we do. So that unit, which is headed by a PhD in food policy, mainly it's concerned with program design, program evaluation, and then publishing those evaluation in collaboration with academic think tanks. So we have a huge project now running with IPFRI, International Policy Food Research Institute, and we are in talks with 7 other academic institutions now for a couple more randomized controlled trials. And then that unit publishes those results to the entire world. So as we now derive our programs from evidence published in the West, our aim is very soon to be able to inspire global development through the work of the food bank. And that, Hannah, to me at least, is the ultimate objective of any nonprofit. So the reality is nonprofits do not have money to affect national change. If you take the budget of the entire nonprofit sector in Egypt, it would be maybe 20% of one governmental social assistance program. So in reality, we don't really have money. And again, I'm saying the entire budget of the entire nonprofit sector, and that sector is very fragmented. So you have like the biggest 12, 15 nonprofits, they, like any Pareto inefficiency anywhere in the world, they are absorbing maybe 95% of the funds. And those 12, 15 nonprofits, you will have like 5, 6 specialized hospitals, charity hospitals. Each one is uni-focused. And then you will have 3 or 4 institutions that work in grassroots development interventions, like the food bank. So in reality, we don't have money to do a massive scale nationwide. But what we can do is that we can make sure that we save the people that we are entrusted to save in the most efficient and in the most impactful way possible. That's number one. And number two is that we document our work and publish it using rigorous methods that can influence the policymaker and can influence global policymakers, and then we can make a global change.
Mohsen, I just want to go back one step. The growth lab that the food bank has developed, it's the first growth lab within the nonprofit sector?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course, I would say, I would safely say that, at least in Egypt here. Because as I told you, Hannah, the main issue is that the nonprofit world, at least in Egypt, still designs and celebrates based on the output level. So you will have a nonprofit that wants to, for example, reduce unemployment among youth. So they will design that in order to, their logic will read as follows. In order to reduce unemployment, we have to give youth training and toolkits in, for example, fixing mobile phones. So they will design their entire intervention to end at delivering the training and delivering the toolkit. Once the training is delivered and the toolkits are delivered, the work is done and they can celebrate. And they can take photos of the youth happy with receiving the kits. And then they say we have saved them from unemployment, which is not true. Because once you turn your head to the other way, there is no way to know if your intention has materialized in the impact you desired in the first place. And that's the main problem. And that's what the Growth Lab is fighting. So the Growth Lab is establishing very strict logical frameworks and monitoring and evaluation frameworks and implementation plans for everything that we do. And their mandate is to contract with outside evaluators, like, for example, the work that we're doing now with the International Policy and Food Research Institute, to act as external development auditors to what we do, and we hold ourselves accountable to ourselves first and the entire society.
I have to say, Mohsen, this is very innovative. And I think this will change the way a lot of nonprofits that want to grow, that want to evolve, will go about doing their work. And I think it gives you sort of a way to, I don't want to say a safe space to create and fail, but it does give you that space to see and develop the interventions that could become more efficient, that could create real change. So I personally have to salute you on this one. I just want to take a shift here. We're talking about the journey of the food bank and how it leads to food security. So recently I read in the Harvard Political Review that The number of food insecurity worldwide has doubled in the last 6 years. So we're talking about roughly 40 million people. I mean, it might be a bit higher now. I'm hoping it's lower. But we're talking about being able to support communities in need or people in need worldwide. Today, we're talking about Egypt and how the food bank is targeting this food insecurity and how it's moving to food security. So you had mentioned the different pillars that the food bank works to achieve. And when we talk about food security, we're talking about availability, utilization, and access. So how has the food bank focused on this? What are you aiming to do? And I think we can take a step back actually and say, what does food security mean to you as the food bank? Because one, you went from feeding people, and that was, I guess, a success. Now we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about access, we're talking about availability. So what does it really mean within the scheme of the experts of the Egyptian Food Bank?
Okay. If you ask me and then ask Dr. Karamani, the head of the food lab, you will hear completely different answers to that question. Because my answer will be a little bit more philosophical. So my concern as the administrator of this institution, so again, this is very personal. So my main cause area that's attached to my heart is female-headed households. And we have a lot of those in Egypt here. So we have, especially in rural areas, where there's a lot of internal migration for people to seek better jobs and better incomes. And then it ends up that the male leaves the family in many parts of rural Egypt, and then they migrate to Cairo or other urban areas seeking jobs, and then the woman gets stranded with her children. And that's in the good cases. But there are, of course, much worse cases that I can leave to your imagination. But again, some of the statistics say that maybe in the rural areas, it's more than 80% are led by women. I think if I would have a purpose in staying here and on the face of this earth, is trying to make their lives a little bit easier. So in bringing it home to your question, I would define food security very clearly to me that a woman staying with 4 or 5 children, some of them, under 2, some of them under 5, some of them in school, because in rural Egypt, you'll find a woman who's alone with 6, 7 children, and it's not her fault. It's not her fault, and it's not, I would say, an unresponsibility from her side, or she wanted to have many children. No, that's the way of life, and that's how it goes. So she will have 6 or 7 children, and she's on her own. No one to hold her back. So I want that woman to feel peace at her heart, that she will be able to eat properly today, and she will be able to, more importantly to her, feed her kids properly today, and she will be able to feed her kids properly tomorrow and the day after. Because that very simple feeling, if she gets it in her heart, it will free her mind to think of anything else. But if that issue is unresolved and it's occupying her mind and heart, nothing else will work. And if we bring this to a little bit of academic background, so we have that poverty brings people's brains to a perpetual state of seeking instant gratification. And I would invite you to think, maybe, let's say in Ramadan, when people are fasting, so most of what they think about approaching iftar time is, I want to eat now. It's very hard to think of anything futuristic or anything, long-term ambitions if you're hungry and just waiting for your next meal. And if you are seeking instant gratification, and if you are only thinking about how to feed your kids today, I wouldn't say it's very hard, it's impossible for the woman to think about her future. to think about her education, to think about investment to ensure her better income, and to think about her children's education, how to make them have a better future. So she's trapped in the now. And we always say, let's live in the now, but this is not the now I'm talking about. Let's live in the now for enjoying the now, but living in the misery of the now, this is something we want to get people out of. So to me, again, the definition of food security is for the woman. I'm saying the woman to capture anyone who doesn't have a back, who doesn't have a very strong back, and doesn't have, a foundation of support behind them. If he needs something, someone will catch him. Okay, the government has very strong and wide networks of social safety nets, but with the inflation that's hitting all around the world now, it's getting harder and harder. And it's getting even harder for the government to expand its safety nets, and it's getting harder for the government to give individual cases more of that safety nets. It's an uphill battle. If you ask Dr. Karamani, which will be the little bit more scientific explanation to what I just said, he will tell you that we use a tool adapted from FAO. It's called FICE, Food Insecurity Experience Scale, and this is the main tool we use to establish food security baseline, and then to see if our interventions are indeed helping to improve that number. And if you read the FICE, it more or less captures some of the things I was talking about. So it tries to explore whether people feel safe that they will eat good today, feel safe that we'll eat good tomorrow. We also use a couple of other tools to help us establish a better constitution of the calories we serve to the people. So we use the dietary diversity score, it's called DDS. And also sometimes we use the 24 hours recall to try to understand exactly what and how much people eat on a normal day. And we try to close, we try to close the gaps that we find in our baseline research through a targeted food pack that is designed for the household size and constitution.
Mohsen, going off of this a bit, what would you say are the main successes and main challenges that you face? Because as much as we do want to highlight everything that's great and good, it is very important for us to really touch upon what is still a struggle for us, what is still a challenge for the food bank within this current environment, within the current ecosystem also. So, you could separate these as two different answers, or you could combine them. But I think it's really important to see where the blocks are.
So, look, aside from what I will say, everything is just minor details that everyone is facing. But nations, corporations, societies can only grow if there are enough good people to drive them forward. So our main obstacle at the food bank is creating the critical mass of good people to drive that institution forward. And this is an open call for everyone listening to us today. If you feel you have something to give to the nonprofit world, and I assure you, we're not the best employer in the world in terms of pay, but we can give you, we will give you a salary, of course, but we'll give you much more than this. And this is not, I would say, a sales gimmick or a TV commercial advertising something. This is real because I'm talking from a perspective of someone who has worked half his life in the private sector and half his life in the nonprofit world. It's very different when you get out of your bed in the morning. It's very different. So in the private sector, you get out of your bed, your work in the end of the day will translate to a board getting richer, to shareholders getting richer, to founders getting richer. But in the nonprofit world, when you get out of your bed in the morning, it's something much more than this. And I think if you think a little bit about it, you will understand exactly what I'm trying to say. So we are not, unfortunately, as an entire sector, branded as a preferred employer. especially to graduates of good schools in Egypt, and even graduates of Western schools who are coming here to pursue a professional career in Egypt. So they prefer first, of course, to work in the private sector where all the money and all the glamour is, and then in the international donor agencies, and then in the local development institutions such as the food bank. But if we are able to attract and retain enough good people in this organization, our speed will be tenfold, and we will indeed be a sustainable organization. Because if all the good people left, there is nothing left of any organization in the world. It's all about the people that are inside. Without the people, it's just buildings.
I mean, Mohsen, I think, is it safe to say that this is an issue within the entire ecosystem, the nonprofit ecosystem?
Of course. Of course, it's an issue within the entire nonprofit ecosystem. The international donor agencies, of course, they are, most of them are international government organizations, but even the nonprofit organizations like Save the Children or Plan International, or most of the international nonprofits that work in Egypt, they are struggling, but not as much as we do, because they have global brands. So graduates, if they lose hope in the private sector and they want to work in the nonprofit world, they will find them much more attractive than local nonprofit institutions. But I would say most of the nonprofit institutions face the same struggle. Like I said, the reasons are, first, we're not branded as an employer I want to run after, because again, many people do not think that we are a coherent and institutional employer. They think that most of the people that work in the nonprofits are volunteers, but we are a professional institution that has to be run by professionals, because this is an industry and a discipline that has to be run by people who understand that industry and that discipline. And our doors are open for anyone to explore more.
Mohsen, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, so I just have a few more questions to ask, and I want to open it up to the audience. If anyone wants to ask any questions, please share your questions. I want to talk about what's going around the world. We see, for example, in places like France, supermarkets are donating food to communities in need. That's, I would say, access in a way. That's a way of providing a meal to someone in need. Why are we not doing this in Egypt? I see a lot of supermarkets, not just the canned goods, they're creating their own meals. They have the capacity to create hot meals. Have the food bank not explored the way to integrate this? Has not thought of this as a way for access for communities in need, or sort of as a hub to support different areas?
Okay, so we have, of course, explored that option, and we have a very long working experience with many hotel chains in Egypt here, along the same lines. But the problem is, in both models, at least to me, it's not a sustainable solution, because private profit-seeking entities, they get smarter with their waste by time. And with the digitizing waves hitting almost all aspects of operation, and it's getting more complex and more advanced every day. So most of these digitizing operations are designed primarily to reduce waste and to improve efficiency in food serving and in all industries, of course, especially in multinational chains who get their systems from their parent companies abroad. So in a nutshell, they are getting smarter in reducing their waste. So their waste is not as predictable as we want, and it's getting less and less as the time goes by. Having said that, we are currently working with members of the Egyptian parliament on passing a bill that regulates how supermarkets, how bakeries, how hotel chains handle their excess or goods that are near their expiry date. So we'll have many, for example, bakeries that choose to destroy their products before their expiry because sometimes they are afraid that those products will, if they give them to a nonprofit, they will leak to the market and get sold at a fraction of their cost, effectively, jeopardizing their brands. And in other cases, they are afraid that maybe when goods are nearing their expiry, someone will get, for example, food poisoning or something, and then they will be the ones to blame. So we're trying to establish a bill that the Higher Authority for Food Safety in Egypt, which is a recently established government institution, will be heavily integrated in that bill to govern and to put a very strong and safe structure for everyone to carry out that operation sustainably.
Mohsen, I don't want to hog you because our audience is eager to ask some questions. So I'm going to open up the floor and we can go there. First question from Dr. Ali Aouni.
Okay, thank you, Hana. Thank you, Mohsen, for an interesting discussion. I just want to get into the food security part. I want to get your opinion about this. When you talk about food security, there are two issues with it. There is an issue of availability of food, availability of safe food, and I'll tell you what this implies. The other part is you try to promote self-sustenance in people. Self-sustenance that gets you into issues of decent jobs, affordable housing, good health. You can see gets into many other things. When you talk about food availability, I mean, you've alluded to food safety, but I could get it rightly into climate change, shortage of water, desertification. I mean, especially climate change. I mean, in Egypt, for example, we've been getting problems with the swings in the temperature that causes all the crops, especially fruits, to damage. Now you're really talking about. I mean, when you get into this, I mean, you can see right away, yeah, you're gonna explode in all directions. And that, in some sense, puts a pressure on SDG 16 and 17 more than anything else, because you cannot do this all by yourself. You really have to collaborate with others, and you're really talking about governance. How do you work together, and everybody would know the scope of his work, his or her limits, etc. Just want to get your opinion about this. I mean, because the more I think about it, it's just. It's even more mind-boggling than eradication of poverty. It's almost the same complexity. It's probably the same beast, but it's a different side of the coin. Thank you.
A very deep question, Dr. Ali. Thank you very much, and I'll try to approach it as simply as possible. So, in the food bank. As I was telling Hana, I fundamentally believe that on our own, even collaboratively, with all the nonprofits that want to work in food security in Egypt, we cannot at all dream of wiping out the entire problem from Egypt. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to run as much experiments as I can across the 3 domains I'm working on, and try to document those experiments to try each and every day to work more efficiently and more intelligently, and document what works best from those experiments and try to use it to influence public policy. Having said that, we work on the issue of availability through our first pillar of intervention, which is basically providing custom food boxes that have predetermined caloric value and caloric constitutions to people to close the food security gap to them. In the third dimension of our work, which is empowerment, we try to exactly do what you've mentioned, but I wouldn't say that we're trying to combat climate change directly, but we're trying to work in a matter that provides a little bit of a pushback to the very aggressive shifts that are happening, especially to our agricultural domain through climate change. As you said exactly, climate volatility has, in the past season, wiped out almost entirely the crops of olives and mangoes. And you have the rising sea levels have caused salinity levels in the soil to rise rapidly, effectively making the farmers require more water and require more additives to the soil to bring out the same yield, which has rendered their profits almost non-existent. What we're trying to do in that direction is we are trying to integrate the smallholder farmers, especially in the crops that we buy from the private sector, directly into our supply chain. So we have now at least 5 or 6 experiments. I think we're closing now to almost 50,000 faddans, where we contract small farmers to grow the things that we put in the boxes and give to people in domain 1. By doing so, we achieve a very realistic win-win situation for everyone. So it's not a zero-sum game in that equation. We buy a little less than we buy from the open market, and we give the small farmers a little bit more than the market prices, and we buy the goods in cash. Also, we intervene technically in the way they use water and in the way they use seeds and in the way they use pesticides. And if they comply to the guidelines we give them and they achieve the yield targets we give them, we even give them an incentives in the price we buy the crops from them. And we collaborate with many entities in the private sector because we touched on SDGs 16 and 17 in that direction. So we are collaborating with a private sector company that does exactly the same, but for a profit purpose. So that company is again contracting small farmers, but they are contracting small farmers to negotiate on their behalf as one block to the private sector. For example, you have a company making jams, so they contract lots of small farmers that produce strawberries, and they negotiate as one block to the factory that produces jams. We collaborate with them, so we use their systems. They have very sophisticated technology systems to talk to farmers through applications and to weather sense, to have some weather sensing applications to predict when storms will come or when rains will come. And we collaborate with them very strongly in what we want to do, which is exactly the same, but again, for purely social goal. If we talk again about, again, SDGs 16 and 17, as I told you, again, I'm working very strongly with the government, and I'm trying to have our work visible and exposed to the policymakers at all times. The experiment we're currently running with IPFRI, International Policy Food Research Institute, to measure the effect of our food boxes on the security level of people in many rural and urban areas in Egypt. This is a tripartite agreement between the Egyptian Food Bank, IPFRI, and the Ministry of Social Solidarity, which I consider, as Hana mentioned, what I'm proud of. This is something I'm very proud of. And it might be one of the most things I'm proud of my work at the Food Bank, that I have put my hands with the government in trying to understand the social impact of a development program, which is something, if you talk about this, like 10 years ago in Egypt, it's like, it's like voodoo. no one will even listen to you, and they will run away. I mean, they'll think we're preaching for, you know, some form of sorcery. If we tell them, oh, we're giving food boxes, and that we want to understand the impact of those food boxes, they'll just say the impact of those food boxes is for people to eat. So if you're now running a randomized control trial, a very large scale randomized control trial with the government.
Mohsen, can you hear me, or did the line cut? Mohsen, are you still there? It seems we have lost Mohsen. I'm just gonna give him a few seconds to see if he can get back on. It seems we lost Mohsen. I'm sure the internet hasn't. I'm sure he's having some internet difficulties. I want to take the time to thank everyone that joined us today. To thank Mohsen as well for his time. I really hope that today's talk gave everyone some insight about what the food bank work entails, how they are targeting food security. We have Mohsen with us. Mohsen, we thought we lost you. We're happy you're back.
I'm back. I'm really sorry. That's one of the burdens of the connected world.
Yeah. I just want to wrap this up for our viewers because we've taken so much of their time. First, I want to thank you for being completely transparent with everyone today, for really trying to give everyone an insight on what it is the food bank does, what it is that you are trying to do as a leader, as the administration. I hope today's talk gave everyone more insight on food security and how the food bank targets this and is working every day to hopefully fight hunger, fight malnutrition, fight food insecurity. I'm going to leave the floor to you, Mohsen, if you'd like to just give any last points that you want our viewers today to really take away from this talk. And I would like to thank Dr. Ali Aouni and the AUC for allowing us this time and this floor to have this open conversation.
I would say as a closing remark, it's a reminder to myself and to anyone that is honored to lead a nonprofit institution is try to work as much as you can on building systems, because none of us is living forever. And we want to make sure that what we're doing today endures beyond our lifetimes. And the only ways to do that is to get good people on board and build systems and empower those good people and give autonomy to those systems to work even if you're not there. I always say my ultimate success as an administrator of this institution is if I render myself completely useless. And I'm trying to work towards that direction each and every day so the organization can endure and the organization will live with me or without me. So this is a constant reminder I give to myself. And I think this is one of the, I'm now been leading development institutions for more than 8 years, I guess. So I think this is the only getaway I got out of this position. Try to make it endure beyond you.
Mohsen, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope this is what you're looking for, and hopefully we'll have another talk soon.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you,
all.
Hana, for the beautiful questions. Thank you, Dr. Ali, and everyone. It was a pleasure and an honor to be with you today.